Good afternoon. Welcome to our second of 4 sessions with Rabbi Michael Birnholz. He is just up the road a little bit in Vero Beach, where he's been there since his ordination. We are so happy to have him with us across the miles, but with us on Zoom for the month. Brain scientist Jim Quick talks about when we are familiar with something, it is much easier to delve deeper and deeper into that topic and to learn more and more if it is something familiar to us. That is the motivation behind this month. Tovu, this biblical text, this song we sing, this moment of biblical comedy with a talking donkey, is something that is somewhat familiar to us, whether it is the song that opens our worship or a biblical story that we point out from time to time. And so over this month with Rabbi Birnholz, we are digging deeper and deeper and deeper into this and in it learning so very much. So Rabbi Birnholz, I want to welcome you to the screen. Thank you for being with us for our second of our sessions with you.
Oh, it's very much an honor. And so welcome everyone. And as we did last week, please feel free as we are moving through our presentation, if you have a question, if you have a comment, to use the chat function, and depending on how many folks I can see on my screen, if you wave your hand or use the raise hand function, that also helps me see that you might have a question. And that is part of this. As I've often said, the Jewish study is not about reading a text or reading an article, it's about talking with your friends about it. And that is what is so wonderful about this opportunity, is that we're getting an opportunity to learn and share about this text of Tovu, which we'll look at in a couple of minutes, but we really have an opportunity to wrestle with it, to unpack it, to look at some of the different threads of it. So as we are moving forward, last week we talked about Tovu, this text from the book of Numbers, in its context in Torah. So we looked at the story of Bilam, or Balaam, you might have heard in English. And Bilam is a non-Jewish prophet. He's being hired by Balak, who is in Moab, which is just east of the Jordan River. He's been hired by Balak to come and curse the people of Israel, because Balak sees the people of Israel are coming across the wilderness to take him on. Balak hires Bilam to come and curse the people of Israel. And as Rabbi Mates mentioned, Bilam rides in on his donkey, not the prophet, not the man with the superpowers. It's the donkey that sees the angel that's about to take on, that's about to hurt Bilam. And the donkey again and again finds ways of protecting Bilam. Bilam finally says, is hitting the donkey, and the donkey says, "Why do you keep hitting me? I'm trying to save your life." And that's when Bilam's eyes are then opened by God, and there's a rather beautiful kind of understanding of what is the role of that donkey, what is Bilam's role, and what it leads to is, instead of cursing the people of Israel, Bilam proclaims this verse, Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, mishkanotecha Yisrael, how beautiful are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel, which is part of our morning liturgy. And we'll see it in a little bit more context in a few minutes in the Siddur. So last week we delved into the text in the Torah and some of the commentaries around it. Today we're going to look at it in the Siddur. How does this text in the Siddur work for us? So we come in in a morning service, we hear this text. What is going on as we hear this text? So we'll be talking about this. And I do believe, if I remember correctly, that last week's session is recorded. So if you want to go back to be able to see what was on last week's session, please, I'm guessing there is a Temple Beth El YouTube channel. Do I have that right? Or some place where people will be able to go back and see that session.
And I can drop that as well.
Wonderful. I've got it's Stephen Sue Feldman and Linda and Steve Friedman. So welcome everybody. Before we really get into the text and discussion, I do note that it's lunch and learn, but it's not a class. The act of stopping to study is actually a spiritual experience. When two people sit to study, the divine presence rests between them. And in part, this is getting to know the text and understand a little bit more about Judaism, but it's also that amazing moment of making connections. Sometimes it happens before the class, sometimes it happens after the class, sometimes it happens during the class. You don't know, every time we sit together to learn together, we build incredible relationships. And so first we offer this blessing, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign in the universe, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to engage with words of Torah. And so as I offer that blessing, and again, feel free to use the chat function, feel free to use the raise hand function, or to use the wave hand at the camera. My eyes are going to be over here looking at the text. So if I could, I have my, if Rabbi Mezuzah, if you're also a spotter, if someone has a question, that is just really helpful. Before I dive in, were there any questions from last week? Any responses, questions? And I know that that Rabbi Mezuzah, you had made a point at the end, because we were talking about the donkey, and the donkey saying, I run into so many challenges, so much abuse, so much trial and tribulation, that I can't even explain to you all of the stuff that's happening. Just all I could do, Bilam, is tell you, you keep doing it. And it was very striking, as you said, that part of the reason you don't bow down for Aleinu Gadol or fully prostrate yourself was because you've encountered so much of that kind of experience of sexist behavior that there was just something that was uncomfortable, that is uncomfortable with you. And it was just, that is the beauty of these texts. How does it give us opportunities to think about how we move through the world, to both challenge us, but also to lift us up, realizing when some of these things really resonate with us.
Thank you. Margaret, do you have something from last week or that you wanted to share? You have to unmute. Just a quick, go ahead.
Well, you know, I kept thinking about it with the donkey. You know, so much in our lives, it really does teach us there's somebody or something telling us, pushing us, telling us what we should do or to assist us, and we fight them. And it just made me think of that how it can teach, that story can teach us all how to kind of open up when people are trying to help us with something.
And Margaret, that is perfect, because it leads us right into the discussion today, which is, that's the beauty of our Siddur. When we are reading these texts, when we go and our melody we use is Ma Tovu, O Alecha Ya. When we start a service and I hear that melody and I see that text, there might be all sorts of different things that I'm thinking of. One might be exactly what you're saying of, wait a second, here I'm walking into the sanctuary, I'm welcoming this new day. Am I listening to the donkeys? Am I listening to those who are just crossing my paths, or those who are taking care of me, or I'm taking care of people that are there around me that are saying, wait a second, you're in danger, open up your eyes. That's one of those things. When I'm saying this text, am I doing that? Or am I being built like Bilam? Am I being really headstrong? Am I being really stubborn? Am I either intentionally or unintentionally have my eyes closed? When I wake up in the morning, am I cursing instead of blessing? So there's all sorts of different layers. We're going to talk a lot more about that, but absolutely, Margaret, that is a great place for coming into the discussion. So here is our text. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael. Part of this is to realize you have ohel and mishkan. So we have these words. Ohel is a tent. Mishkan is a place where dwelling happens. And we have Yaakov, Jacob, and we have Israel. And Israel and Jacob, of course, are the same guy. We'll talk more about that next week. Jacob is the name from his youth, when he was the one who pulled his brother back into the womb because he wanted to get out first. And Israel is the one who wrestles with God, with beings divine and human, and prevails. And we'll talk about some of that next week. One of the things I do want to note is it's easy as you're going through a Siddur to just see the words on the page. to not even realize that it's an active link. And it's pretty awesome that we have that kind of language. We have the language of the internet now, that Rabbi Mates, you dropped into the chat a link that would take you to the video for last week's class. This is the same kind of thing, that the rabbis have put a link, a hyperlink on the page, so that as we're going through these prayers, do we know what's the story being told? Why do we want to remember that story in this moment? How is it impacting our experience of worship? So there's the text. And then following it in the Siddur is not more quotes from Numbers. The only quote from Numbers is the line of Ma Tovu. 6 words, like a 6-word memoir, 6 words from one part of a verse from the book of Numbers. And that's the opening to this entire story. In the Siddur, what follows, and some congregations sing it, and a lot of congregations don't, is a whole set of psalms. Va'ani barov chastecha avo veitecha, I, through your abundant love, enter your house, and bow down in awe at your holy temple. That's Psalm 5, verse 8. Adonai ahavti me'on beitecha, unkom mishkan kavodecha. O God, your loving temple abode of the dwelling places of your glory. That's Psalm 26, 8. And my apologies, I don't have control, something I don't have control over in my own office. Okay. So here you get these, and you might see beitecha, this is all about house. And then you might see here, beitecha, here again, it's all about God's house. And so these are references of Psalms talking about God's house, talking about God's temple, even while the original verse is talking about the tents of Jacob and the dwellings of Israel. Another, so not Psalm 95, verse 6. Vani eshtachaveh ve'evracha lifnei Adonai osi. I humbly bow down low. I kneel before the Eternal One who made me. And va'ani tefillah lecha Adonai et ratzon. As for me, my prayers come to you. Again, here's Psalm 69. So you have a text that is woven together with all of these different psalms, these different verses of Psalms. And it's one of those things that is interesting to me, how much we learn by ear. I bet if you were in your sanctuary, if you sing these verses, you would sing along to them and might not even process them on the page. I know I'm guilty at that at times. I remember being at Camp Coleman, and I was on staff at Camp Coleman. I've been on faculty at Camp Coleman, and I've worked in the Campscape, which is the garden program at Camp Coleman. And we were talking about the verse from the Birkat Hamazon, that's from Deuteronomy, Kakatu ve'alchata ve'savata uverachta et Adonai Elohecha. I'm wondering how many of you recognize that with me just saying it. But if I go kakatu v'alchata v'savata uverachta, I'm wondering if that becomes more familiar. It might not. It might be if you go to URJ summer camps and you've sung Birkat Hamazon, then you know it. The campers knew it as soon as I sang it. But if I said the words and I said the quote, and then I said the melody, they knew the melody, but they never had processed the words. And in which, of course, you will eat, you will be satisfied, and you will bless, is really important for being on this good land that I'm showing you, is a great verse to be in the garden with. But here these campers are singing it 2 to 3 times a day, never processing. They're singing it. They can sing it beautifully. They know when to pound the tables for it, but they hadn't connected those words they were saying to the action that they were taking. And that's such a vital part of this. And the reality is that we haven't, that you just learn these things over time. I think we learn a lot more by ear than we necessarily learn with what we're about to do with these texts of Ma Tovu. So I appreciate you being here so we can be able to do some of this study. So one of the things I want to do is show you some of the commentary on the language of each of these different verses. So This is coming from, this is from a Chumash, the stone Chumash, and this is from Sforno, one of the medieval commentators. And he says your tents, your dwelling places. Why does it repeat your tents and your dwelling places? In addition to the modesty and sensitivity demonstrated by the arrangements of the tents and camps, the sages expound that these terms refer to the habitats of Israel's spiritual heritage. Tents alludes to the study halls, and Mishkanotecha, which relates to Shekhinah, God's presence, alludes to the synagogues and temples. So I'm going to come back and unpack this a little bit. There are other commentaries that say that Bil'am is blessing the people, their tents and their camp, because the tents are arranged so that no one's front door looks into somebody else's front door. So that everybody in the camp is alluded modesty and sensitivity and privacy. They carefully arrange their camps, and that's the basis of the blessing. Here you get an additional layer that it's really not talking about that literally Bil'am looking down, there's the people of Israel, there are their tents and camps. It's also talking about what it's going to mean for Israel when they have tents. Those are the study halls. And Mishkanotecha, which if you look, it has the shin, the kaf, and the nun. This is the root for Shekhinah, God's indwelling presence. And for Sforno, that's a reference to our permanent houses of worship. Rashi, different commentator, he gives a midrashic interpretation that both terms refer to the temples and tabernacles. It's not, for Rashi, it's not study halls and places of worship. They're both references to temples and tabernacles. And the tents alludes to them while they stood. So Ma Tovu Ohalechi Yaakov, that means that's when the temple and the tent of meeting stood. But Mishkanotecha is based on mashkon, or collateral and or surety. So Rashi is taking it, scrambling the root, finding another meaning for that root, and he says when that is when Israel sinned and God took collateral, as it were, destroying the temples instead of venting God's anger against the people, which is really a remarkable reading from Rashi. He's saying that Ma Tovu Ohalecha Yaakov, that is a reference to when the temple stood, and Mishkanotecha Yisrael, because of this idea that of mashkon, which has to do with collateral. Therefore, that's when the temple is destroyed, because rather than getting angry at the people of Israel themselves, God let the temples be destroyed. So Sheldon, you're saying that's anachronistic? What do you mean? That Ma Tovu happens long before there are temples and tabernacles? There is a tabernacle, but certainly not a temple. And so that kind of raises the question of what is Rashi really getting at when here. So again, here we are, and these are comments that are coming from Chumashim, but also some of them, and you'll see them, that are actually in the Siddur themselves. Why is Rashi saying when we say this in the morning, why are we saying both the moments when the temples are standing and the temple times when they're destroyed? Anyone have a thought on that?
I was going to say this about the earlier quote too, but maybe it relates to this. It's like having mikvahs at Masada. Like the Zealots built mikvahs on top of the floors that Herod had built at Masada, saying like, we're going to procreate, we're going to continue into the future. And in the same way here, you have a text, someone wants to curse the children of Israel. And can you go to the previous slide? Just because this is what, we're not only like, you think you're going to curse us, like we're going to have so much going forward. We're going to have all these things going forward. So I wonder if that relates to what you're kind of delving into, that there will be a time, like you might right now, it's like Ezekiel, you might right now think there's no tents or tabernacles, metaphorically or literally, however you want to say it, but there will be again.
And I think that image of the mikvah ot at Masada, it's a really incredible and powerful one, that here we are, the people of Israel getting up to pray, Here we are somebody cursed us, and instead of curses out come blessings. And in this moment, we're going to remember, yep, we feel blessings when we succeed, when our temples stand. But even when those moments of destruction, we can remember, we can praise, we can bless, we're still here. That we continue even past those moments. And so, yes, Rashi is introduced. I don't think it's an anachronism. I think, and I don't know if I would call it wishful thinking. I think it's building up, it's adding to the original text by giving it those deeper kinds of meaning, giving it other additional layers. Okay. We were having a robust discussion about baking earlier because I was taking a sourdough rye out of the oven right before class started, and I just talked to one of my congregants who was talking about his mother making rugula for Michael Landon. That's a wild story, but I think about like a babka. You have the basic chocolate or cinnamon babka, and there's lots of debate whether it should be cinnamon or chocolate babka. But if you've read Shannon Sarna's book, she has like 15 different kinds of babka. It's still babka, and I look out and I want some of you are going to go like bubblegum babka. Really, that's not babka. And others, it was cotton candy. It was a cotton candy babka. Some of you will be like, no, that's not a babka. And others are very like, oh, bring that. And so that's where this is here you have that basic text. What are some of those different ways we can expand it to give us more to work with or more to resonate with? And my wife is learning banjo, and she started with one type of finger picking, and now she's adding a different one, and it brings a different, same instrument, brings a completely different sound. And so here you have Sforno and Rashi looking at the same text, bringing different ways to resonate. And so some mornings when you say it, it might speak to you one way, and another morning it might be another. Or Linda and Steve, you're reading it and one thing is hitting you guys, and then Steve and Sue, you're going to read it, or sorry, Steve and Sue, you're going to read it and it's something else is going to speak you. Same text, all of us are together in the sanctuary, and you have all of these different melodies that might be playing. Here's another one. Ramban, so this is Nachmanides, interprets the entire passage as a blessing, beginning with Israel's sojourn in the wilderness, when it dwelt in tents, extending further in the land when it established its built-up dwelling places, supported by productive and well-irrigated fields and vineyards, and would be victorious over all who sought them to do harm. So you've got Sforno, who says it's a reference to to study houses and sanctuary and worship and study. You have Rashi, who says this is a time when we're surviving, and a time when we face destruction. And then here you have Ramban that says, no, this is time-based, that this is based on both when we were in tents, but also when we have dwelling places. And as a promo for the sisterhood presentation that I'm doing in November, everything comes back to well-irrigated fields and vineyards. It really is all about the garden project, just like to point that out. And so I think November 18th, I am doing a project on Jewish gardens for the sisterhood, if anyone's interested, because it all does come back to the garden. So here you get Ramban, completely different commentary. None of these is the best. These are just different, standing not side by side, and they're going to resonate with different people or with you in different moments. This is a different kind of commentary. I'm going to change gears a little bit. And this is actually in Mishkan Tefillah. And Rabbi Mates, I don't know if you have even seen this one. It's right at the bottom of the page in Mishkan Tefillah. And I read this and I'm like, wow, it was mind-blowing to see this, because it's absolutely beautiful way of using our liturgy. That's not just, I'm going to come into a sanctuary and sing pretty prayers, but it's ritual at its best. Ritual is physical actions we take to work, act, to move out some emotion or spiritual experience we're having, or an action we take to bring a spiritual experience to us.
It's like an I thou with your temple.
Yes, very much so. So when you see the synagogue from a distance, you say, Ma Tovu, O Halecha Yaakov, how good are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling, O Israel. As you approach the door, stop momentarily, arrange your clothes properly, and say, I, through your abundant love, enter your house. So here you have, I'm walking up. Here's a text that I say, because I want to enter with blessing and not curse. As I'm walking in, a chance to arrange yourself. Do you have your mask? Do you have your sanitizer? Sorry, that's more recent. Then you enter with dignity and awe, bowing slightly towards the holy ark, and you say, I bow in awe at your holy temple. I love your temple abode, the dwelling place of your glory. So you arrange yourself physically, you walk in, and then you arrange yourself spiritually. You feel the kavod, the weight, the honor, the respect of that place. Then walk in a bit and bowing again, say, I will humbly bow low. I will kneel before the eternal God who made me. And then if it's a weekday, you leave some charity for the poor as much as you can afford. And you say, here I stand ready and willing to perform the commandment, love your neighbor as yourself, and then you may pursue the love of God. It's really powerful because and we did it in some way when we came into this space. I stopped and we did a blessing saying, this isn't just a class. This is a spiritual experience we're having. Using the text in this way to me is so remarkable because it says you're not just coming to a club. You're not just out at a concert. How do you physically and spiritually, and your spiritual impacting your physical and your physical impacting your spiritual, bring yourself into a holy space and your holy self into a physical space? And it really is. And it's one of those things that it's right there at the bottom in the notes that unless we stop and look at some of those notes, and this is a really big challenge. And Rabbi Mates, I don't know how y'all have your services. We've really gone to very few people are picking up a siddur. Most people are reading the service off the wall, off of the projection, in which case you lose all of the notes and all of the other readings that I know I catch my attention and that are part of my spirituality. And so that's one of the challenges. Visual tefillah is absolutely wonderful in a lot of incredible ways, but it has some negatives that we lose some of the other content and the ability to navigate around the siddur. Yesterday, we had a family that is looking to move to Vero, and they were sitting in their car. And y'all might not remember, but they used to make paper maps. Do you all remember paper maps? They're big, like sheets of paper that you can fold up, and they have like streets and landmarks and other things so you can navigate, right? We didn't always use our phone, and you just put in the address, and then your phone or your GPS device tells you where to go. If you have a map, you get the whole big picture before you narrow in. With this, you just narrow in and you just drive. Well, then this is easier because you can't look at a map while you're driving, and it's easier to focus on your podcasts while you're driving if you don't have to worry about where you're going. But at the same time, you lose that bigger picture, which has information which might be more, you might miss a street. You might not see a street name. There might be a store. You might drive past a friend's house and not even know it because you're not looking at the world in the same way. And that's one of these challenges. That's why I love teaching this, because it gives me a chance to dig into the siddur. And when I say teaching it, I also mean studying it, because I go back and I'm studying all of this stuff. There's a lot of stuff I know, but there's a lot of stuff I'm either learning and or relearning to be able to then share it. And so that's part of the fun. Any other questions as you're looking at this? And part of me wonders if it would be beneficial to have this as a sign in those different places, even if it's just for a month, that in the parking lot, you have the first text, and then at the door, you have the next one, and then into the sanctuary you have, so that at each step people see that it's not just a I'm coming to X, but I'm actually coming to an experience of worship. And I have another rather incredible example of this. I was a student rabbi in Columbus, Mississippi for a year. My dad was the rabbi in Jackson, Mississippi. That's why I say y'all a lot. I was born and raised in Jackson. My dad was the rabbi there from 73 to 86 before we moved to Tampa, and my parents are still there. So while I was in rabbinical school, I was doing my thesis on cemeteries in Mississippi, Jewish cemeteries in Mississippi and Louisiana. And so I was able to get a student pulpit in Columbus, Mississippi, and Starkville, or they're connected to each other, in order to be have time for some of that research. In Columbus and my congregation, and there are a few of my congregants that are on, my congregations have always sung. They join into services, they're singing. Clapping is a little bit of a challenge for us sometimes, especially when it's me clapping, because I really have that horrible sense of rhythm, and it gets interesting in there sometimes. But this congregation, they didn't read along, they didn't sing along. I couldn't figure out what was going on, and they looked like they were like half asleep. It's like, what is going on? And then one day I was in the sanctuary, and then I looked down and I realized the chairs that they had in their sanctuary were theater chairs. And so I asked the leaders, I was like, oh, where did the chairs come from? They said, well, a movie theater in town was closing up and we got their chairs. And I'm like, it can't be. But it was so incredible to me that the physical space, because it was movie theater chairs, when people sat in a movie theater chair, they're like, oh, I'm here to watch a production. And I could be making it up, who knows? But I really had to wonder, is it happening because the space really impacts us physically and psychologically with that experience? Here is that beautiful reminder when we have Ma Tovu. Even if it's not in signs, there you are sitting in the sanctuary. The text is being offered. Take that moment and look and picture yourself coming in from the car, passing through the door, arranging your clothes. Take that moment to bend. And bowing isn't just humility. Bowing is making sure your joints work, right? Sometimes when you bow, it's like, wait, do the knees work? Does the back work? And my shoulders work? And my congregants might think I'm really pious when they see me bowing and stretching, but part of it is just making sure that some of the parts are still working at my advanced age. That's part of Judaism too, that prayer isn't up here thinking, it's a full body motion experience. So here's another kind of place of this, because when you come into a Jewish space, what do you have? You have a mezuzah, and we're actually doing a program called Mezuzah Palooza with a religious school on Sunday. And this is one of my favorite kind of commentaries. And what this is framed as minhag versus kavanah. A minhag is a custom. And so customs are the things we do all of the time. They're not Jewish law, but that's the custom of the place. Kavanah means intention. And so an intention means I'm not just doing something, I'm thinking about it. The opposite of kavanah is keva. So keva is the fixed or the set, that's the balloon. Kavanah is the breath that you breathe into it to make sure that it works or that it inflates. It's easy to do stuff as a minhag. That's what I do when I come in. I can just sit and I just sing. There's ways to take those and turn them into a kavanah or kavanot as adding to that custom, to that intention. And this is part of it. This is Kyle Southard. I think someone sent this to me at some point. And he writes that I really enjoyed your classification of yarmulkes, Shabbos greetings, shul talkers. And while I was in Denver this past weekend, I noticed a number of different methods for recognizing the mezuzah. And I broke them into 7 different classifications and jotted down some thoughts. If you can post them on your blog and advertise them a bit, I'd be happy to read any comments your followers might have. And so what ensues is a whole description of different styles of kissing the mezuzah. that you've got the 2 fingers, you've got the full hand high five, you've got the people who give it a kiss, the people who wave to it. You've got all kinds of different ways of people saying, I'm seeing this mezuzah, I'm connecting with the mezuzahs, I'm coming into the space. That's the minhag, the custom. How do you then make sure you're just doing, not just doing it as rote, but also adding to it, what's your intention? If you're giving it the full-on kiss, is there something more behind it? Or if you're touching it with your hand, the other one that caught we taught a little bit about mezuzah to our religious school because we're having a mezuzah program come up. And as soon as we talked about, by the way, when you go into a room and you touch the mezuzah, I've never seen at Temple Beth Shalom that many kids stop and touch the mezuzah as they went out of the sanctuary. That's part of this too. It is easy to do stuff by rote, to do stuff by habit, just to do stuff because you do it. Ma Tovu every morning, and we find different ways of making it interesting or different ways for it to catch our attention. It's one of those ways to get us out of just doing stuff by habit or just doing stuff by mechanically, and to really pay attention. Wait, how am I coming into the sanctuary and what intention am I bringing with me? Any thoughts or questions on that? And Rabbi Mates, I'm happy to share that with you. It was really fun with my 7th graders. One of them, she asked me, Rabbi Birnholz, what are you teaching this morning? And I told her how to kiss. And she was like, wait, what? What are you doing? And then I pulled out this list of 7 ways that you can kiss at mezuzah. She was both relieved and also kind of bummed out that I gave her that kind of introduction to it.
I'm obsessed right now with Dara Horn's new book, People Love Dead Jews. And one of the things she does, and I think we do this, especially in Reform, where you often have like a less knowledgeable congregation, is people insist like, you're singing the wrong Shema, or you're, doing the wrong thing or whatever, or someone got so upset with me once because I said them for the Shema by mistake. I'm like, well, traditionally, you're really supposed to stay in the same position as the Shema and V'ahavta. And Dara Horn in her new book talks about how Jews insist, our names were changed at Ellis Island. Well, they weren't. Jews changed their names because they felt like it would be better for society. And we tell these myths, and I think it's something really to name. It's almost like a problem in the Jewish community. We're so insistent, this is the way, or this is the right way. And we don't always create space to be oh, I could learn. I could, learn something like this. So.
And it's not just to learn something like this, but that there are so many different facets or different approaches, and not every one of them is for everybody, and not every one of them is for every minute. My favorite example of that is, do you tear your challah or are you slice your challah? And that is a very rich debate. Margaret, you have a thought. You have to unmute.
I'm really I'm making a comment from Rabbi Mates about Jews changed their names. And yes, that's true. But there were many that the names were changed for them at Ellis Island. And I'm going to tell you a quick story, which is I had a client.
Can we hold it? Can we hold it to the end? Just because I want to, I want to let the rabbi get on with his lesson. Okay. Thanks.
So I'm going to come back to some of the commentaries. This is from Shir Chadash commentary on Sim Shalom. There are actually, in addition to the notes in Sidurim, there are actually whole books that are commentaries where you can learn all kinds of the different dynamics of how the Siddur is put together, but also some of these beautiful, that we're going to see, some of these beautiful responses of ways of looking at these texts. So here on Ma Tovu, how lovely. These were uttered by Bilam, who was hired to curse Israel. They have the distinction of being the only prayer in the Siddur attributed to a non-Jew. Bilam's blessing, together with the following verses of Psalms, are appropriate for recitation when entering a synagogue. It's really pretty amazing that here, this is the only text that we have in our Siddur that we know of that is coming from somebody who is not Jewish. And that's how we start our service in the morning. And again, it's that question is we're looking at the world, and as the world sees us, going back to what Margaret had brought up of, who are we listening to? Who is calling out to us, and what do we bring, blessing or curses, into the world? Your great love. So this is on Psalm 5, verse 8. This refers to the temple. The sages term the synagogue a minor sanctuary, a mikdash ma'at. So the words originally describing the temple were appropriate when applied to the synagogue. Okay, so what they're trying to show is that line of the tabernacle, the Ohel Moed or the Mishkan, to the Beit HaMikdash, to the house of holiness, the temple, and to the synagogue, temple, and shul. And so this, based on the phrases found in Ezekiel, I have become to them a mikdash ma'at, a minor sanctuary or diminished sanctuary in the countries whither they have gone. And so as we're coming into the synagogue, trying to remind that this is a reflection, a connection to the temple in Jerusalem. And so I kind of wanted to show you this, and this might be history you're very familiar with or something that might not be, that people of Israel are in Egypt. You might have heard the Passover story once or twice. People of Israel are in Egypt. You get 10 plagues. You have the whole Moses thing. The sea splits. They go out. They walk for 50 days. They get to Mount Sinai. On Mount Sinai, they are given directions to build a Ohel Moed or a Mishkan. Those words get used back and forth in discussion. Is it one building or two buildings? But basically, it's a portable center of worship. And what is happening in that portable center of worship is connecting to God through sacrifices. And sacrifices, you have to think about sacrifices, not that they were taking the animal and just burning it up. There was some of that, but a lot of it was holy barbecue. They were grilling the meat. That was the way it was, that meeting of the divine through sharing of food, both sharing the food with the divine, but sharing the food with each other, that was part of the connecting with God. In addition, part of it was that if I'm going to take life in order to eat, let me also show reverence and be thinking of the source of life. So in the tabernacle, they're doing sacrifices. They then eventually, and King David does the conquering, but Solomon builds Beit HaMikdash, the first temple. And I'm hoping you can see Kuf Daled Shin, Kadosh, the house of holiness. And that was they brought the Ark of the Covenant. They're bringing the same structures, and I'll show that in just a minute, of the Mishkan, and bringing that into Jerusalem and setting it up in that place. And they're creating a Jewish space that starts running the rhythm of Jewish time. In 722, before the Christian era, or before the Common Era, you have a schism between the 10 northern tribes and then the 2 southern tribes of Judah and Benjamin. In 722, the northern tribes are conquered by the Assyrians coming out of Mesopotamia. Those populations, except for the refugees that end up in Jerusalem, they all kind of disappear. The population is taken away, they disappear. And that's where you see the shift from Israelite to Judahite. We say it's Judaism. How do you spell Judaism? Judaism. Jew is a reference that we are coming from and connected to this tribe of Judah that is the only one that survived, and Benjamin gets absorbed into the greater Judah too, that survives that conquering in 722. Isaiah, Broadwall, they actually survive that, are able to survive and hold out against the Assyrians. They survive for a little bit longer until the Babylonians come in 586. And instead of what the Assyrians did with mixing up all of the populations, the Babylonians take the leaders into exile with them. And it's really a pretty amazing thing, because this is one of those first times in history that instead of having a God that is tied to a physical place, that you can then take God with you. And if you can't have your physical space of worship, you have your time of worship, that you remember what it's like to be in those physical spaces. And that is part of what goes into exile with us. We then, of course, come back and then build a second temple and move on to Rabbinic Judaism. Here is a little bit about, so you can see the tabernacle, that you have a seven-branched candelabra, a menorah. Rabbi mates, do you all have a menorah in your sanctuary?
We have a stylized menorah that's on the wall. It's wooden and flat, and it's stylized, but it is. We have other menorahs like in other places, but the one that's full time in the sanctuary is stylized. The ark, we have a very unique ark, and so, as you remember from your teenage years, and so the ark and this menorah, we have wooden 10 commandments and all these things. So people may not be aware that's a menorah, but it's the flat, kind of shofar shaped piece actually in the back behind the ark.
And that's one of the things the ancient synagogues did not use the Star of David. That's only a few hundred years old. The ancient symbols of Judaism were the etrog and lulav, the seven-branch menorah, and the shofar. For the high holy days, Shabbat, and the festivals, that was the sign. The symbols of Jewish time were the symbols of Jewish space. So you just said that you have 10 commandments. You have an ark that holds the Torah scrolls. I'm guessing you have a table where you put your challah and your kiddush. So a lot of what was happening in the tabernacle is also happening in our sanctuaries. And we see that again. Whoops, I'm going to come back. So you have a second temple that's built, and a lot of that's happening in our sanctuaries is also happening in our synagogues. And we'll keep kind of following up with that theme. Just with the history, second temple is built. It's updated by Herod. The second temple is where the site of the Hanukkah story is, and we're coming up into Cheshvan, and then we'll get to Kislev. So we're on our countdown to Hanukkah. And in Hanukkah, remember, the temple isn't destroyed; it's just desecrated, and so it survives a little bit longer for another 100 years or so, until it's destroyed by the Romans in the year 70. So this is Jerusalem, and this is the Western Wall. And I love showing this picture because this is not one of the walls of the Temple of Jerusalem. This is one of the walls that Herod built. Before Herod, the Temple Mount was a mountain. And what Herod did is he built retaining walls so he could have a plateau to build a bigger temple. The Dome of the Rock is in the spot, if I'd stop hitting the wrong buttons, is in the spot where the temple was. And what you see, what we do in modern Israel is we go to the basement. I know we're in some of you probably know what basements are. Those are the lower levels. So here we are downhill. We're at the base of the Temple Mount. It's not really the base because the base of this wall goes down much further beneath your feet. But we're gathering in the place that helps us have a connection to that Jewish space. And so here, the house of assembly, the synagogue, we also call it the house of worship. It's also the house of study. And Judaism shifts from sacrifice to prayer and study and acts of love and kindness. And we're a diaspora, right? We're descendants of Judah carrying religion and language and culture across the Middle East and Europe. One of the things that I always remember with this, and again, Tovu, how do we have our synagogue be a reminder of the Temple of Jerusalem? And the Temple in Jerusalem is a reminder of the tabernacle, the tent of meeting for the people of Israel. And this is one of those things that, in addition to doing acts of study and acts of ritual and acts of kindness at the times where the people of Israel, the Torah is an interesting connection, weaving of two different symbols. If you notice, the Torah has a crown, it has a breastplate, it has a mantle. Look who also has a crown, a breastplate, and a mantle. It's the priest of ancient Israel. So the Torah scroll is dressed like a priest. And what is the Torah scroll written on?
Skin.
Of what? What kind of skin?
I guess of a calf, of a.
Yep, absolutely. And there are other animals that are used. But think about that for a moment. Our Torah scroll is written on the skin of an animal that would have been sacrificed. And so at the time of the sacrifices, with a symbol that has all of the markers of the person doing the sacrifice, we're reading from a scroll that's written on the skin of an animal that would be sacrificed. Again, trying to thread all of these different pieces of our practice together. So coming back to these commentaries, I love your house. This is Psalm 26:8. Here too is the original reference was to the temple. Although the temple is thought of as the place of your glory, the sages taught the synagogue too was the house of God. Hillel used to say, if I come to my house, I will come to your house. I hope I said that right. If you come to my house, I will come to your house. This refers to one who frequents synagogues and houses of study morning and evening. The Holy One blesses them with the reward of the world to come, as it was said, wherever I cause my name to be mentioned, I'll come and bless you. And so here you have this beautiful teaching that if we come into the temple, into the synagogue, which is a reminder of the temple, it's a reminder of the tabernacle, if we go to meet God in those places, then God, that divine presence, will come with us back into our world, back into our houses. And you can look at it in two different ways. One is, hold on one second. One is very simply, very theological, very theistic, that if I go and I connect with the presence of God at the synagogue, then that presence will come with me to my house. There's another kind of symbolic way of thinking about this, that if I go to the synagogue and I do these acts of study, of ritual, and acts of loving kindness, it's going to impact the type of human being I am, that I'm going to feel connected to something transcendent and eternal, that I'm going to learn how to be the best human being I can be, so that when I come back to my house, I am understanding how I am B'Tselem Elohim. I am made in the image of God. What if I've thought about, wrestled with Ma Tovu, been more aware of how to be a better human being? When I then go back to my house, I'm carrying all of that with me. It has changed how I move through the world. Going back to the kids, when we said, here is a thought about touching a mezuzah, they heard it, and then they started to enact it. And so Ma Tovu, every morning we're saying these words because we need those, they're powerful reminders, not just to go through the motions, but how do we look for the opportunity to make all of these connections? The sages interpret praise of Israel as a reference to tenets of learning and prayer. The Jewish home achieves its highest level when it incorporates the value of the synagogue and study hall. Collection of verses expresses the love and reverence of the synagogue that, in the absence of the Holy Temple, is a place where God's glory resides among Israel. And so here's a pitch by the rabbi who says to you, remember when you go to the synagogue that it just doesn't appear to you that you have to invest and take care of your synagogue. See, shameless plug for supporting your synagogue, implicit in Ma Tovu. I'm actually going to go ahead and stop. I'm going to stop the screen share because I wanted to leave a few more minutes. If there are questions, if there are comments, I know, Margaret, you were saving something from earlier.
Am I muted? Oh,
you're good.
It was silly. I had a client once, his name was Lustgarten, and he says to me, do you know how we got our name? I said, no. He says, because people would get off the boat and they'd go to the people at Ellis Island. They'd say, what is your name? They'd say Lustgarten. And that's where they got it. What they were asking for was a brothel. True story.
So that's Dara Horn's point, is that families tell these stories because they don't want to tell the other, who knows? It's just, yeah, exactly. But it's back to the text.
No, No, but and that actually is part of the spirituality of the meeting, because we have a Lustgarten family in our congregation. So then you get to start playing the Jewish geography because of one random comment. You never know who you're going to run into. Other thoughts, other questions as we're offering this, delving into the texts of Tovu for the Siddur.
Why do you, I mean, this is kind of like a bigger question, but why, unless you get to this in a later class, like, there's like every word in the Torah means something, but why did the Shema become what it became versus other things? Like, why is there such resonance in this section? Like, was it written in a way to, I just had this question. I do a lot about the Nuremberg trials, and what Harvard does, because they study the trials too, is they say, like, why was this created in a way where it would be so disseminated? So, like, I'm asking that kind of question here. Like, why was this written in a way that's making us talk about it, with these facets, like a lot of other biblical texts don't have, so many years later?
I think it's a fair question. Like, how did this become one of those texts that just resonates so powerful? And it gets in your head and gets in your ear that you'll walk around singing Tovu all day. Rabbi Dan Treiser, in his Memories of Blessings, one of our colleagues, one of the conversations I had up at Camp Coleman with him is he was telling me about something called a 6-word memoir, which is an absolutely fun thing to have a class and program around. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, and I forgot how I got it to 6. But Ma Tovu Oalecha Yaakov Mishkanotecha Yisrael, right? Again, 6 words. So I don't know if there's something of the psychology, that there's something in the rhythm and the pace that it's not just the meaning of it, but there's something in the poetry. The Lord is my shepherd and I shall not want. There's something sometimes in the language and the rhythm of the poetry that I think resonates with us physically and spiritually and emotionally, that then those texts become the ones that are just, they roll off the tongue and they draw people together. And so I think that's part of it. I think there's more there, but it's just some of those Yitkada, Yitkada, Shemei Rabbi. There's just something in the rhythm and the sound of it that I think connects, and then they end up becoming instruments that generate a lot more resonance. Other questions, other comments?
I think when you mentioned about the prayers that people or the music that will say to you, that's not how you sing it. I think that could be part of it. They get into a certain rhythm about a prayer, and then they hear it in another way. It's like, it's not theirs anymore.
Well, a big thank you to our tech person, Jake, who's behind the scenes. And Jake and I were talking that might be the 4th session that we actually might look at some of the musical settings of Tovu, because that's a different way of looking at this text of how do we respond to music, and how did those musical choices. And one of the things we actually started the conversation was, what happens when you come up to Temple Beth Shalom and you hear it one way, and then you go to Temple Beth El in Boca and you hear it a different way? Or you're here in my congregation on one Saturday morning and it's sung one way and a different one. How do you go back and forth between what's familiar, what sounds right to you, what emotion you're feeling? Because if you're feeling in a particular emotional state, sometimes the musical melody choice doesn't resonate with you. So that I think is going to be part of what session 4 we'll work on for session 4, because it's a real issue, especially when you don't read the Hebrew or the phonetics, and the only way you know the text is by the melody. And there are a lot of us that do that, and that's a huge piece of challenge, because there's such a wide variety of melodies over there, but you also want your congregation to balance between what is new and engaging and what is familiar and engaging.
Any other questions? Just because we're at the 1 o'clock.
We're at 1 o'clock.
Hour. All right. Awesome. All right, Rabbi, thank you so much
Thank you.
for this second of 4 sessions. We're totally excited about that session 4. Jake is down for that, so that would be fabulous to look at that. And if not, then we'll see you next week. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today, and have a wonderful week.
Thank you, everybody.
Very good.
And thank you, Jake, our producer, too. Thank you. Jake, did the recording stop?